Well, next stage, number 3. Starting on handles, because it's as good a time as any to start, because it's something I do at different stages throughout. However, my handles start, come on boys, mind your bums, come mind, with, basically I get a lot of timber that I deal with myself. I'll have some big lumps and that just stays, and I'll check make sure it doesn't check too much. Then eventually it'll get sort of semi-quartered. I just split it down roughly, and then after that's dried and if it hasn't checked too bad, I'll show you. I've got some rough sawn down there. I've also got some in the garage. Then what happens is it goes then onto this stage and it'll sit there for quite a long time. Now I'm using this for all sorts at the minute, but some of the timber on there and then the timber I have at the top is all stabilised. The middle there is generally, although some of the bottom layer is now because I'm running out of space, is wood that I've had and it's been really well dried. And to get to that point, once it's had a few months on the shelf, so I know it's dried and it's not going to check, it then goes out into the garage. And come on boys, we have the entourage. And as I've shown in some of my other videos, then it will come down into the cabinet, and this is my drying cabinet. This is used for two things. One is if it's timber which I'm not going to stabilise, like a lot of the Pahutakowas, Puriris, Black Mare, some of the heavier stuff that well, basically doesn't need it. At the end of the day, you know, a lot of timbers, some timbers don't take stabilising very well, and some actually just don't bloody need it, no matter what you might read and hear. So they'll go into there then until either I feel that I've got the moisture down really low, and then what happens if I'm not going to stabilise them, they then come out there and go back onto my shelf so that they take on the normal moisture content roughly of the atmosphere. Or else if you don't do that, then they tend to move a lot more. Even if you seal them with things, they'll move a lot more. So that gets them normalised if you want. If I'm going to then do any of the stabilising ones, if I'm using stabilising timbers, then they go into my little toaster oven, which is up there, and with a little extra thermometer on the side, because it took me a while to get the temperature right. And they spend normally 12 hours, so they'll go onto there, and then they get another 12 hours baking before I then go through my stabilising, which I've had a little while ago. I had my jar implode, but I've actually managed to find a stainless steel jar and another jar, a glass jar that will go inside that, and now I'm just waiting for some more resin to come. So but anyway, that's a different video. So that's basically where I'm at, and then what I end up with is hopefully something like this. Now this has been rough sawn and dried and everything, but as you can see, I've actually cleaned up, hopefully you can see what I've actually cleaned up one of the sides, and what that does is that then starts to give me, I pick the best 90-degree angle on that, and from there it goes onto my table saw. And what I can do from there is I will set the distance basically. So what I will actually do is set the distance on my table saw that I want a little bit bigger, roughly, but a little bit bigger than I'm going to want the thickness of the scales. So all I have to do then is get that on there and run through. Now this is quite a dangerous machine and it's very noisy, and I think you can get the hang of what I'm saying, so I'm not going to actually just go through that process. Basically, as you can see here, by cleaning up and picking the best 90-degree side, I can get a flat cut across here. Then once that cuts off, I slide it up and get another cut, and it gives me a similar effect to using a thicknesser, which I don't have but I would like, because that would be even better. I could get them really good then, because they don't come out perfect. But that then gives me a pair of scales, something like this, which are, from what I was used to when I used to spend hours and hours having to try and do everything by hand again, are virtually a pair. They're virtually matched, so I'm really chuffed with that. So, hand sand. So, yeah, basically once I've got something which I'm hoping are, you know, pretty close, which generally is a lot easier now, onto the block. Now here, what I've got here, you can see I've got a concrete marble piece I got off a friend who had a kitchen done, so I've got a marble piece, basically an anti-slip mat, glass sheet, and then I fixed a piece of glass paper onto this. Now originally I used to peel it all off and clean it all and all sorts, and then one day I just thought, well, I'll just leave one old one on, I just sit them on top and it just stops it moving. It saves having to completely strip it off and put it back on all the time. And I could make sure that the whole underneath of that has to be covered. You can't just put a strip around the outside, because if you do, you get steps and wobbles. And then basically it's off we go. Now once I think it's something like the old pencil, and then I just keep, and something I do is I keep changing hands, changing directions, and then it stops the bias of one particular strength or technique or hand from obviously stop. Once I can put the pencil marks on, and 2, 3, 6, and I can actually remove them that simply. I'm sure that's a flat spot there. Oh, that's then that's when I'm happy with them. And then what I want, and as you can see, I always mark top. I'm paranoid. The amount of times I've got this wrong, but I always mark top and bottom and in and out. So, and then what I'm actually looking for, so I know it's not 100% perfect, but what I want to do is when I put those scales together like that, I pretty much want that line to almost just disappear. So when they're perfectly lined up, it's just almost gone. So that's step one. Liners. So once I've chosen the colour of liners I want, which obviously can go on whatever somebody decides, or something I think matches the timbers, it's keying up on one side. I think G10 has got to be the best, most stable handle liner material. I just think it's brilliant. I've had absolutely no issues with it at all. I really like it. And I've no worries about anything with some fibre liners, especially on hunting knives or knives that got wet a lot. I was always worried whether they might just draw a bit of in, but nothing with that with this. But it's bloody tough stuff to work with. And we have G10. And we have a glove. Doodles on. And some blanks waiting to dry and get done. Right. A nice clean cloth. I always use the inside because it pulls the dye off. Inside of the timbers. Now at this point I need to decide which way I want the knife to sit in the scales, and that comes from how much of the grain or whatever grain I can see, and this has some coloration and possibly a bit of spalting and things coming through it, so I don't want to cut that off. So that gives me that as the top and that as the front. I also always look if there's any damage around the edges that could be cut in. G-Flex resin. I say it's the best, so that's what I use. And in this case, as the liners are smaller than the scales, I'll glue up the liners and then fit them on. So here we go. And I always like to leave some in the pot. So as you can see, I always mix a bit more than needed, and I leave a dollop in the pot. That just assures me that it's gone off properly. There's nothing wrong with the resin, and there's nothing wrong with the proportions and the mix. Now I know that I've got the parts that I actually want are the two top corners, so I've got to make sure that the liner covers that and hangs over just very slightly. And I want to I've done this on all sorts of things, but now I have another piece of granite. Oh, and it's flat. I've run all sorts over it, so it's as flat as anything I'm ever going to get. And then what I'm doing is on here, a little bit of grease proof of the G-Flex hanging over the end of the liner, and that way I know I'm working to the when I work them I can actually match the liners up, that match the scales up. And these are a bit of a fiddle to start with because unless you get them perfectly central, they just want to push themselves out of the way. Keep an eye on that just to make sure it's just not just wanting to just slide that little tiny bit. So just keep an eye on that occasionally. Clean that up later. Rips the sandpaper. And there we are. Oops. Yeah. These are the last set of scales I've done. Now what I do then is if there's any big pieces of either the wood or the resin hanging off, I just run them through the bandsaw through here. Now I keep an old blade on here, so it sounds horrendous, but the G10 rips the blades to absolute buggery. So I keep a clean blade if I'm wanting to split smaller scales, because if I've got some smaller scales or thinner scales, the table saw is just too big for that. It's okay for thicknessing and things, but I can't get a small cut, but I need a really sharp blade for that. So if you've got one of these bandsaws and you find your cut tends to waver a little bit, chances are one of the edges on the blade is getting worn, so you probably need a new blade. So I keep an old one for doing the manky bits. Yep, so, and then what I do is onto the so hopefully by that point, wait a second, now then, by that point, what I've actually managed to get a couple of really quite close matching scales. So I've managed now, by the time I get to this point, these are pretty damn good, pretty damn flat and even. So I now need to decide just how thick I want the scales to be, and if I need anything taken off these, now's the point when I've got to this point when I can run them through the table saw again and just possibly just skim them off or even them out or something like that. So but the first thing, this should be quite a quick job. And then what I should end up with is a beautifully flat handle scale with a liner. Lovely. So, a couple of finished handle scales. Right. Now, at this particular point, this is just something I've been doing this evening. I've got a few other little bits of jobs on, but at this point now, that's pretty much it for them. What I do then is these go into a little Ziploc bag, and that's just to make sure that that there's no, if there's any changes in the atmospheric pressure, even though these are stabilised, these are actually stabilised walnut. Even if there's, you know, a slight change, it can warp them. So, you know, if anybody says that stabilised scales won't move, they're pissing up your back, or they've got so much. I mean, I suppose it could happen if you've got one, and what you've actually done is used a really heavily spalted timber, something that's really soft and has basically become almost a block of resin with some wood stuff in it, if you get my drift. I don't tend to use anything like that. I don't tend to get a lot like that over here. I just find it safer than sorry. These are done now. And we have quite changeable weather. That's the thing. In the middle of the summer, it's not bad. It tends to be dry and stable for a long time. At the minute, we get some very humid weather. So at this point, these go away nice and safe. And then the next job is onto the grinding the bevels and hand sanding.